At first, everyone thought it was just another normal photo, until the dog refused to stop staring at it. The image had already spread across the internet like wildfire, shared thousands of times in just a few hours, reposted on forums, reaction pages, and late-night threads where people argued over what was real and what wasn't. And yet no one could explain the one detail that didn't make sense. Not the lighting, not the angle, not the background, but the dog, because in the original video clip attached to the post, a golden retriever named Max sat frozen in front of a phone screen, his eyes locked onto a single spot in the photo, as if something inside it had captured his full attention, something no one else could see. And the longer the video played, the stranger his behavior became, his ears twitching slightly, his body stiff, his tail completely still, not wagging, not relaxed, just tense, like he was trying to understand something that didn't belong there. And the comments quickly filled with confusion. People asking why the dog looked scared, others laughing it off, saying it was just a coincidence, maybe a reflection or a trick of light. But then the clip continued, and Max leaned closer, inch by inch, until his nose nearly touched the screen, letting out a low, uneasy sound, not loud, not aggressive, just enough to make people pause and replay it again, because it didn't feel random, it felt intentional, like the dog recognized something that everyone else had missed, and the person behind the camera, a young woman named Emily Carter, could be heard softly calling his name, trying to pull his attention away, but Max didn't respond. Not even a glance, not even a flicker, he just kept staring, completely focused, like the rest of the room didn't exist anymore. And that's when people started noticing the pattern, because according to Emily's caption, this wasn't the first time it had happened. Every time she opened that same photo, Max reacted the exact same way, stopping whatever he was doing, turning toward the screen, and locking onto that same invisible point, as if something inside the image was calling him. And it didn't matter if it was morning or late at night, whether the room was bright or dim, the reaction never changed. And that consistency was what made people uneasy, because dogs don't fake reactions, they don't pretend, they don't perform for attention, they respond to what they perceive, what they sense, what they instinctively know is there. And if Max kept reacting like this, then the question wasn't whether the photo was strange, the question was what exactly he was seeing, because whatever it was enough to make him stop eating, stop playing, stop responding to his owner, and just stare, silently, intensely, as if waiting for something to move, something to reveal itself, something hidden just beneath the surface of an image that, to everyone else, looked completely normal. Emily had never thought much about the photo before posting it. It was just a quick snapshot she had taken in her living room earlier that afternoon, sunlight coming through the window, her coffee cup on the table, and Max lying comfortably on the rug. Nothing unusual, nothing staged, just one of those quiet moments people share online without a second thought. But now as she sat on her couch watching her phone light up with notifications, the same image felt different, heavier somehow, like there was something inside it she had missed the first time. And Max was still there in front of her, sitting unnaturally still, his eyes fixed on the screen as if he could not look away. Even when she turned the brightness down or tilted the phone at a different angle, he adjusted instantly, tracking that same exact point with a focus that made her uneasy, because this was not how he usually behaved. Max was playful, easily distracted, always reacting to sounds or movement around the apartment. But now he seemed locked into something invisible, something that existed only within that photo. And when Emily softly called his name again, her voice carried a hint of nervous laughter, trying to convince herself it was nothing. But Max did not respond, not this time. His ears flicked slightly, but his gaze never shifted. And that was when she decided to test it, slowly lowering the phone until the image disappeared from his view. And almost immediately Max blinked, his body relaxing just enough to make it seem like whatever had held his attention was gone. But the moment she raised the phone again, the tension returned, his posture stiffening, his eyes narrowing slightly, and a faint, uneasy sound escaping his throat. Not loud, not aggressive, but enough to make Emily's stomach tighten, because it felt deliberate, like he was reacting to something real, something consistent, not random behavior, not a coincidence. And she scrolled through her camera roll quickly, opening other photos from the same day, the same room, even ones where Max himself appeared in the frame, but none of them triggered the same reaction. He barely glanced at them before looking away, uninterested, normal, until she returned to that one image, and instantly his focus snapped back into place, like a switch had been flipped. And that was when Emily noticed something she had not paid attention to before, a comment buried among the hundreds. Already flooding in, someone had written, "Wait." Pause at the 3-second mark and zoom into the glass behind the couch, and Emily hesitated for a moment, her thumb hovering over the screen, unsure why that simple suggestion made her feel uneasy. But curiosity pushed her forward, and she replayed the short clip again, this time slowing it down, watching Max's reaction frame by frame, noticing how his eyes tracked not the center of the image, not himself, not Emily, but something slightly off to the side, something near the reflection in the glass door behind the living room. And as she pinched the screen to zoom in, her breath caught just slightly, because the reflection was not as empty as she remembered. There was a shape there, faint, almost blending into the background, easy to overlook at first glance, but once seen it could not be ignored, and Max let out another low sound, softer this time, almost like a warning, as if whatever he had been trying to show her all along was finally coming into focus. And for the first time since the post went viral, Emily no longer felt like she was watching something harmless. Emily leaned closer to the screen, her fingers trembling slightly as she zoomed in further, trying to make sense of the faint shape reflected in the glass behind her couch. And at first it still looked like nothing more than a shadow, a trick of light blending into the afternoon glare. But the longer she stared, the more defined it became, not fully clear, not detailed, but enough to suggest a presence, something standing just beyond the angle of the camera, and her mind immediately tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a reflection from another apartment window, maybe a passing figure outside, maybe even a distortion caused by the glass itself. But none of those explanations fully settled the unease building in her chest, because Max was reacting in real time, not to the idea of the image, but to something specific within it, and he let out another soft, uneasy sound, his body lowering slightly as if bracing, his eyes never blinking, never shifting away from that exact spot. And Emily slowly turned her head toward the actual glass door in her living room, her heart beating just a little faster, half expecting to see something there. But the reflection now showed only the quiet interior of her apartment, empty, still, exactly as it should be, which somehow made it worse, because whatever Max was seeing existed only inside that captured moment, frozen in the photo, and not in the room around them. And she swallowed hard, trying to steady herself as she replayed the clip again, this time focusing not on Max, but on the reflection itself. Watching frame by frame as the lighting shifted slightly with the movement of her phone camera, and then she saw it, just for a fraction of a second, a subtle change in the outline, like the shape was not entirely fixed, like it had depth, and her breath caught, because reflections were supposed to mirror reality, not introduce new elements, not move independently, and she paused the video again, zooming even closer until the image began to pixelate. But even through the distortion, the suggestion remained, something standing at an angle that did not match the room's layout, something positioned where nothing should have been, and her phone buzzed again with another notification, another comment. Rising to the top, someone writing, "That is not a reflection, check the timestamp. It shifts when the camera moves," and Emily felt a chill run through her arms, because she had just noticed the same thing, and before she could stop herself, she stood up and walked toward the glass door, holding her phone out in front of her, trying to recreate the exact angle of the photo, matching the position of the couch, the table, the light coming in from outside, and for a moment everything lined up perfectly. The reflection looked normal, predictable, just a mirror of what was already there. But when she compared it to the frozen image on her screen, the difference was impossible to ignore. The space behind her in the photo contained something extra, something her real environment did not. And Max suddenly stood up beside her, his nails clicking softly against the floor as he moved closer, positioning himself between Emily and the glass door, his body tense, his gaze still locked onto the phone rather than the room. And that detail unsettled her more than anything else, because it meant he was not reacting to the present, he was reacting to the past, to something captured and preserved in that single frame, something he recognized as wrong. and as Emily slowly lowered the phone, hoping his behavior would relax again, Max hesitated this time, his eyes flickering briefly between the screen and the empty space behind the glass, as if trying to decide which one mattered more. And that hesitation was enough to make Emily realize that whatever had been in that photo was not just a mistake. It was something that had once been there, something Max had noticed before she ever did, and something that, for reasons she could not yet explain, still felt close. Emily did not sleep that night. Not really, because every time she closed her eyes she saw the same image in her mind, that faint shape in the reflection that did not belong. And no matter how many times she told herself it had to be a trick of light or a coincidence, the memory of Max's reaction kept pushing back against that explanation, making it harder and harder to believe that this was something simple, something harmless. And sometime after midnight, she found herself sitting back on the couch with her phone in her hands, staring at the photo again, hesitating before opening it, because part of her did not want to see it anymore. But another part needed to know, needed to confirm whether what she had noticed earlier was real. And when the image filled the screen again, Max, who had been resting near the doorway, immediately lifted his head, his body tensing before he even stood up, as if he recognized the moment. Before it fully happened, and within seconds he was back beside her, staring, silent, focused, his gaze locked onto that same exact point. And this time Emily did something different. Instead of zooming in right away, she took a screenshot, then another, adjusting the brightness and contrast, trying to isolate the reflection, trying to make the shape clearer without distorting it. And with each adjustment the outline became slightly more visible, not fully defined, but enough to suggest shoulders, a head, a presence that stood just behind where she had been sitting when the photo was taken. And her breath slowed as she realized how close that position was. Only a few feet away, separated by nothing but space she had believed was empty. And she quickly set her phone down, looking around the room again, checking the corners, the doorway, the reflection in the glass. Everything exactly where it should be, everything quiet. And yet the unease did not leave, because the image told a different story, one that did not match the present. And her mind began searching for any reasonable explanation. Maybe someone had been outside on the balcony. Maybe a neighbor had passed by at the exact moment she took the photo. But when she walked over and opened the sliding door, stepping out into the cool night air, the angle did not line up. There was no position outside that could create that reflection at that height and distance. And when she stepped back inside, closing the door gently behind her, Max followed closely, staying near her side. His usual playful energy replaced by something more alert, more aware, and Emily picked up her phone again, this time scrolling back through her camera roll, searching for other photos taken in the same spot over the past few days, hoping to find something similar, something that would make this feel less isolated, less intentional. But image after image showed nothing unusual, the same couch, the same glass door, the same lighting, all completely normal. Until she reached a photo from the previous evening, and as she opened it, her heart skipped slightly, because while the image looked ordinary at first glance, Max reacted again, not as intensely as before, but enough to make her pause. And when she zoomed in carefully, the reflection was different, not empty, not entirely clear, but carrying a faint distortion in nearly the same area, less defined, almost as if something had been there, but not fully captured. And Emily felt a slow, creeping realization settle in. This was not a one-time anomaly. This had been building, subtle at first, easy to ignore, until now, when it had finally become impossible to overlook. And as Max shifted closer, pressing lightly against her leg, his eyes still fixed on the screen, Emily understood that whatever he had been trying to show her was not new. It was something he had noticed before, something that had been there longer than she realized. And the thought that she might not have been alone in her own space, not even in moments she believed were completely ordinary, made the quiet apartment feel very different. Emily could not ignore it anymore. The pattern was too consistent, too deliberate. And even though every logical part of her mind pushed back against the idea that something was truly wrong, the evidence kept stacking in a way that refused to settle into a normal explanation. And by early morning, she had made a quiet decision. One that felt both simple and strangely heavy. She needed another perspective, someone who could look at the same image without the emotional weight she was now carrying. And without thinking too much about it, she sent the photo and the short clip to Daniel, her boyfriend, along with a brief message asking if he noticed anything unusual, trying to keep her tone casual even though her fingers hesitated before pressing send. And for a few minutes there was nothing, just the faint hum of the apartment and Max pacing slowly near the couch, glancing between her and the phone as if waiting, as if he understood that something important was happening. And then the message came through. Daniel replied quickly at first, joking that it looked like Max was just being dramatic. That dog sometimes reacted to screens in strange ways. And Emily felt a small wave of relief reading that, wanting to believe it, wanting everything to fall back into something normal. But then a second message followed, longer this time, and the tone had shifted. Daniel asked her to zoom in on the glass behind the couch, specifically the lower right corner, and Emily's breath caught slightly as she opened the image again, her fingers moving automatically now, repeating the same zoom she had done before, but this time focusing on the exact area he mentioned. And for a moment, she did not see anything new, just the same faint outline she had already noticed, until Daniel sent another message, a screenshot with a circle drawn around a slightly different angle. And when Emily compared it carefully, her heart began to beat faster, because the shape did not stay consistent. In one version of the image it appeared slightly higher, in another slightly shifted, as if it had not been captured in a single fixed position, and that detail unsettled her more than anything else. Because reflections did not change between identical frames, they did not move independently, and Daniel's next message came through with a simple question, "Are you sure you were alone when you took this?" And Emily immediately typed back yes, without hesitation, because she remembered that moment clearly, the quiet room, the sunlight, the stillness, nothing out of place, nothing unusual. But even as she sent the message, doubt crept in, not about the memory itself, but about what she might have missed, what might have been there without her realizing it. And she looked down at Max, who had now stopped pacing and was sitting directly beside her again, his body tense, his eyes fixed on the screen with the same unwavering focus. And Daniel's messages continued, suggesting simple explanations at first, reflections from outside, a passing figure, maybe even a distortion from the camera lens. But each possibility faded as quickly as it appeared, because none of them explained the consistency of Max's reaction. None of them explained why the shape seemed to shift within the same captured moment. And then Daniel asked one more question, one that made Emily pause before answering. "Do you have any photos from before this one, taken in the same spot?" And Emily hesitated, thinking back to the earlier image she had already checked, the one where the reflection had seemed slightly distorted but less defined. And slowly she opened it again, holding her breath as she zoomed in once more, comparing the two side by side. And this time the difference was impossible to ignore. The earlier image showed only a faint suggestion, barely noticeable, while the newer one revealed something far more present, far more defined, as if whatever had been there was becoming clearer over time. And Emily felt a quiet, unsettling realization settle in her chest. This was not something that had appeared suddenly. This was something that had been there before, something that had been getting closer. And as Max let out a low, soft sound without taking his eyes off the screen, Emily understood that he had been trying to warn her long before she ever noticed. Daniel stopped suggesting simple explanations after that, his messages growing slower, more deliberate, as if he was choosing each word carefully. And then he asked Emily to do something specific, something that at first seemed unnecessary but quickly became impossible to ignore. He told her to turn off every light in the apartment and take another photo facing the same direction, matching the angle as closely as she could. And Emily hesitated, glancing around her living room as the early morning light began to fade, the familiar space now carrying a weight that had not been there before. But she knew she had to try. So she stood up, her movements slower than usual, and one by one she turned off the lamps, the overhead light, until the room was left in a dim, soft glow coming only from the faint light outside the window. And Max followed her closely, staying within a few feet, his body tense but quiet, watching her every move. And when she finally returned to the same spot near the couch, she raised her phone, her hand steady but her breath shallow, carefully aligning the frame with the previous image, making sure the couch, the table, and the glass door were positioned exactly the same. And then she took the photo. the soft click of the camera sounding louder than it should have in the stillness. And for a moment, nothing happened, just silence, until she looked down at Max. And he was already staring at the phone again, his eyes locked onto the screen before she had even opened the image, and a chill moved through her as she slowly tapped to view the photo. And at first it looked darker, less detailed, the shadows blending together in a way that made everything feel flatter. But then she zoomed in, her fingers moving almost automatically now. And the moment the reflection came into focus, her breath caught completely, because the shape was clearer this time, unmistakable in a way it had not been before, no longer just a vague outline, but something that suggested form, height, presence, standing in a position that could not be explained by anything in the room. And she quickly took another photo, adjusting the angle slightly, then another, and with each image the same figure appeared, shifting just enough between frames to suggest movement, not fast, not dramatic, but real. And Daniel's message came through again, asking her to compare them side by side. And as Emily did, her heart began to race, because the difference between each photo was subtle but undeniable. The figure seemed closer in one, slightly angled in another, as if it was not bound by the same rules as the rest of the environment. And then Daniel sent one final instruction, something that made Emily hesitate longer than anything else so far. He told her to open the original photo again, the one that had started everything, and hold it next to the new ones. And Emily swallowed hard before doing exactly that, placing them side by side on her screen. And as her eyes moved between the images, the realization settled in slowly but completely. The figure in the original photo was positioned farther back, less defined, almost hidden, while in the newer images it had become clearer, closer, more present, and the pattern was impossible to ignore. Whatever had been captured was not static, it was progressing, changing over time. And Max let out a low, uneasy sound again, stepping slightly in front of her, as if to block her view of the glass door behind them, even though his eyes never left the phone. And Emily felt a wave of cold understanding move through her, because the photos were not just showing something that had been there, they were showing something that was still there, something that had not disappeared when the moment passed, something that had been getting closer with each image. And as she slowly lowered the phone, her gaze lifting toward the quiet reflection in the glass door, she realized that for the first time, she was no longer just looking at a memory. She was trying to understand something that might still be watching her now. Emily stood frozen for a long moment, her eyes no longer on the phone but fixed on the dark glass door across the room, her reflection faintly visible in it, still, unmoving, exactly where it should be. And yet everything felt wrong now, because her mind could no longer separate what was real from what had been captured. And Max shifted again in front of her, his body tense, his stance protective in a way she had never seen before, not playful, not reactive, but intentional, as if he had made a decision about where he needed to be. And Emily slowly backed away from the door, step by step, her gaze never leaving the reflection, waiting for something to change, something to move. But nothing did. The room remained quiet, unchanged, and yet the feeling did not fade. It only deepened, settling into something heavier than fear, something closer to realization. And her phone buzzed again in her hand, Daniel's name lighting up the screen as he called this time instead of texting. And Emily answered immediately, her voice low, almost unsteady as she tried to explain what she was seeing, what she had compared, what did not make sense anymore. And Daniel listened in silence for a moment before speaking, his tone different now, no longer dismissive or analytical, but cautious. And he asked her something simple, something that made her pause before answering. He asked if Max had ever reacted to the room itself, not the photo, not the phone, but the actual space around them. And Emily glanced down at Max instinctively, noticing how his eyes were still focused on the phone screen, even though it was lowered slightly in her hand. And she shook her head softly, answering that he had not, that his reaction had always been tied to the image, never the room. And there was a brief silence on the line before Daniel spoke again, quieter this time, suggesting that whatever Max was reacting to might not be present in the same way anymore, that it might only exist in the captured moment, something that had been there when the photo was taken but not necessarily now. And for a second that idea brought a small sense of relief, a fragile explanation she could almost accept, until Max moved again, his head turning slowly, not toward the phone this time, but toward the glass door, and Emily's breath caught instantly as she followed his gaze, watching as he stared directly at the reflection, his body lowering slightly, the same tension returning, but now directed at the actual space in front of them. And Daniel's voice continued through the phone, asking her to describe what Max was doing, but Emily did not respond right away, because she was watching something she had not seen before, a shift in Max's focus that broke the pattern they had been relying on, and her heart began to race as she realized what that meant, because if his reaction was no longer limited to the image, then whatever he had been seeing might no longer be confined to the past, and she took a slow step backward, her eyes fixed on the glass, waiting, listening, trying to detect any change at all, and the reflection remained still, unchanged to her eyes, but Max let out a low, steady sound, not loud, not panicked, but firm, as if he was acknowledging something that had just crossed from one place to another, and Emily's voice finally broke through the silence as she spoke into the phone, barely above a whisper, telling Daniel that Max was no longer looking at the picture, that he was looking at the door, and the weight of that realization settled heavily in the room, because for the first time, the difference between what had been captured and what might still be present no longer felt clear. And Emily understood with a quiet certainty that whatever Max had been trying to show her was no longer just something in a photo, it was something that might have followed into the present, something that had not stayed where it was supposed to be. And as she stood there in the dim light, watching her dog hold his ground between her and the glass, she realized that the moment they had been trying to analyze was no longer just a memory. It had become something they were now a part of. Emily did not realize she was holding her breath until her chest began to tighten, the silence in the room stretching longer than it should, heavy and unnatural, as if even the air had slowed, and Max remained in front of her, unmoving except for the slight rise and fall of his breathing, his eyes fixed on the glass door with a focus that no longer felt like curiosity, it felt like recognition. And that difference settled deep in Emily's chest, because curiosity could be dismissed, curiosity could be explained, but recognition meant something had been seen before, something had been understood in a way she could not yet grasp, and Daniel's voice came through the phone again, steady but lower now, asking her to stay calm, to describe everything exactly as it was happening. But Emily found it difficult to put into words, because nothing in the room had changed in a visible way. There was no movement, no sound, nothing that should have drawn attention, and yet Max did not move, did not relax, did not look away, and that consistency made it impossible to ignore. And slowly Emily lifted her phone again, her hands careful, deliberate, almost reluctant, and she opened the camera instead of the photo, pointing it toward the glass door, and for a moment the screen showed only the same reflection she could see with her eyes, dim, quiet, unchanged, and Max did not react to the camera itself, only to what it might reveal. And Emily adjusted her position slightly, angling the phone the same way she had before, matching the height, the distance, the alignment of the couch and the door, and as she did, something subtle shifted on the screen, not a clear shape, not a defined figure, but a distortion, a faint difference in the reflection that did not match the real space behind her. And her heart began to beat faster as she realized that the phone was capturing something her eyes were not fully processing. And she held it steady, watching carefully, her breathing shallow as she waited for the image to stabilize. And then Max let out a low, steady sound again, stepping slightly closer to the glass, positioning himself directly between Emily and the reflection, and that movement felt intentional, protective, as if he was trying to create a barrier. And Emily swallowed hard, her eyes moving between the screen and the door, trying to understand what was happening, and Daniel's voice grew more urgent now, asking her what she saw, telling her to step back if she felt uncomfortable. But Emily did not move, not yet, because something inside her needed to understand, needed to confirm whether this was real or something her mind was creating. And as she focused on the screen again, the distortion seemed to deepen just slightly, forming a shape that echoed what she had seen in the photos, not fully visible, not detailed, but present enough to suggest that it was not random. And her fingers tightened around the phone as she realized that this was not just a reflection issue. It was something that existed only when captured, something that revealed itself through the lens but remained hidden to direct sight. and Max's body remained tense, his stance firm, his eyes unwavering, and Emily felt a quiet shift inside her. A transition from confusion to understanding, not complete understanding, but enough to know that the rules she had been relying on no longer applied. And as she slowly lowered the phone again, her gaze returning to the empty glass door, she could not shake the feeling that whatever had been seen through the screen had not disappeared. It had simply returned to a place she could not directly observe, waiting just beyond the edge of what she could perceive, and the thought that the camera was the only thing revealing it made the quiet apartment feel even more uncertain, because it meant that the absence of evidence in front of her eyes did not mean the absence of something being there. And as Max remained standing between her and the door, steady and alert, Emily understood that she was no longer trying to prove whether something existed. She was trying to figure out how close it really was. Emily slowly lowered the phone until the screen went dark, the faint glow disappearing from her hands. And for a moment the room felt still again. Almost normal, but not quite, because something had shifted in a way she could not undo. And Max remained exactly where he was, standing between her and the glass door, his body steady, his attention fixed on something she could not see. And this time she did not try to understand it through the camera. She did not reach for another explanation or another test, because somewhere deep inside she had already accepted the one truth that mattered, that Max had been right from the very beginning. And that realization changed everything, because it meant that every strange reaction, every moment of tension, every quiet warning she had dismissed had been leading to this, not to scare her, not to confuse her, but to show her something she could not have seen on her own. And she took a slow step forward, her movements careful, her breathing steadying as she reached out and gently placed her hand on Max's back, feeling the warmth beneath his fur, grounding herself in something real, something she could trust. And Max did not look away from the door, but his posture softened just slightly at her touch, not relaxed, but reassured, as if he understood that she finally saw what he had been trying to show her. And Emily let out a quiet breath she had been holding for far too long, her eyes moving once more to the empty reflection, and this time she did not expect to see anything. She did not wait for movement or change, because she understood now that whatever had been there did not need to reveal itself in obvious ways. It had already done enough. It had already left its mark in the images, in the pattern, in the way it had been noticed. And slowly she turned away from the glass door, guiding Max with her toward the center of the room, putting distance between them and the reflection, not out of fear, but out of instinct. The same instinct that Max had followed from the start. And her phone buzzed again in her hand. Daniel's voice coming through as he asked if she was all right, if everything was still the same. And Emily paused for a moment before answering, her gaze drifting once more toward the dark glass. And she nodded softly, even though he could not see it, telling him that she was fine, that nothing had changed, and in a way that was true, because the room itself remained quiet, unchanged, exactly as it had been. But everything she understood about it was different now. And as she sat down on the couch, Max settling beside her, still alert but calmer than before, she reached for the phone one last time, not to analyze the image again, not to search for answers, but to do something simple, something final. And with a steady motion, she deleted the photo, then the screenshots, then every copy she had taken, watching as they disappeared from the screen. And when it was done, she set the phone aside and leaned back slightly, her hand resting gently on Max's head, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. And for the first time since everything had started, the room felt quiet in a way that was not unsettling, just still, just present. And Emily closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting that stillness settle around her.